Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to take your guys' questions and talk about all the things you guys want to this week, as it was another slow week in the world of Star Wars news. So, again, if you haven't joined us in a week, or maybe you didn't catch last week's stream, the beginning of it, we are changing up our format a bit. Still basically the same thing. We're still taking your guys' questions. That's the majority of the show. Well, now it's the entire show. And we take your guys' questions, answer them as best we can, and try to get as many people into the show. We're shrinking our show lengths down from they were supposed to be an hour and a half always, but we'd always go about 2 hours. Now we're trying to keep it into the 1 hour to 1.5 hour range. We're not going to go over an hour and a half, but we're going to try to shoot for an hour, kind of wean our way down from that hour and a half mark throughout the next few weeks. So it is going to be a faster paced, more streamlined show, trying to get all your guys' questions in. So make sure you send them into the chat, as I've posted in the pinned comment. We did kind of implement slightly new rules for our chats. It's first come, first serve. We are going to be holding fast to the 2 questions per person consecutively rule. So we're going to take, as you can see in the chat right now, Batasai has asked a bunch of questions. We'll take 2 Batasai's questions, then move down to the next person on the list. Once we get to that person, answer a couple more questions from other people, we'll go back up to the top and get to Batasai's question again. So you can ask more than 2. We're going to get back to your questions at some point, but we're trying to give everybody a shot to get in here. The other way you can guarantee you get a question on the stream tonight is super chat. Super chat of any amount gets you a guaranteed answer on the show. You can also join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs, where if you join for the $4 tier or higher, you get a chance to get priority chat access. So how does that work on YouTube memberships? You just get it automatically. If you're on Patreon, let us know what your YouTube handle is, and we'll keep an eye out for your questions so that you can get that priority chat access. We are also going to be kind of trying to get as many in as possible, and in doing so, we're gonna try to keep it flowing. But if you have questions or comments based on some type of chat we're talking about, you most likely will get that chat into the conversation while we're talking about that specific thing. So if you want to comment along with whatever topics we're going on, that's another way to kind of get into the stream a little bit faster. We are running multiple different programs now when it comes to the chat. One of them is the question of the week. So we've been taking clips from these streams and taking one of your guys' questions and making it into a video. It has been a couple weeks since we've done this because we've had so many new things to cover, whether it be Visions, Last Order, Master of Evil review came out last week. We've had a lot of things to cover in the world of new Star Wars news and books and all that type of stuff. But now that most of that's over, the last Star Wars book has come out for the year. We are basically going to be going back to that format at least once a week. So make sure you comment along. You have a chance to be kind of the star of a video itself as well if you're commenting along and joining us in the chat. All right. Also, last thing for housekeeping, make sure you hit the like button. Only 2 people have hit the like button right now. We have a lot more people than that watching. So make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. We do this every single Tuesday. So if you're interested in the Q&A format, want to get to know us a little bit better, make sure you subscribe. All right, let's get into the chat now. And we're starting with Batside Manslayer. Says, I rewatched Kenobi. It's a solid 7.5. If you ask me, my favorite Disney Plus show, still the addition of Leia and his dynamic and her dynamic with Kenobi adds a lot to the saga, but especially to the reason about why she names her son Ben. I understand that by the time of the show, the Hunt for Ben Solo project was still around. Hints have been around in other shows like Mando, when Grogu's on Tython and a blue butterfly is there, and we now know that Lucasfilm was completely on board with the idea. Cosplays of Rey are outside Disney, and so far 2 planes with messages for the project. Question is Adam back inevitable, and when? So let's start with the first part. Kenobi, I'm glad you still enjoy Kenobi. I've seen it 4 times, I think, but it's been a few years since I've watched it. It's one for me that still has extremely high highs. A lot of the thing that's frustrating with Kenobi to me is a lot of the like simple things that it should just automatically get right, whether it's the ways things are staged, whether it's the environments, the way things look on the volume, whether it's kind of dumb stuff like Leia hiding underneath the poncho, walking through Fortress Inquisitorius, just logic things like that, really simple things Kenobi doesn't get right, but the character moments and like the big moments that define each character, the big moments that it wants you to feel, it does a really good job with. So it's a frustrating show continually for me, but I'm really glad you still enjoy it. And then as for your second question, with Adam being back inevitably, I think he will be. I mean, I think it's only a matter of time. For years, we've kind of all said and speculated that he's probably more likely the reason that Ben Solo hasn't come back in anything, because he's a huge actor and he's doing Oscar stuff and he's the one, who has a big career, especially out of everybody in that trilogy. He's the one with the biggest career. And why would he want to really come back to Star Wars? Well, now we know that that was never the case, that he was down and he's been on board for years. So I think if you have somebody with that caliber of talent, somebody that the fans have rallied around so well and this kind of figurehead for this movement of support, right now, Disney, Lucasfilm, they're desperate for anything that could be a hit. They want to have hit movies. They need to have hit movies, especially for Star Wars. Because even if Star Wars is, say, their third biggest IP right now behind Marvel and Avatar, which, that's debatable, but Avatar makes so much money that it's hard to argue that that's not their most bankable film franchise right now. Even if it's third, it's still probably the most iconic of the three of those. So if getting Star Wars back on its feet, getting Star Wars back in theaters has to be a high priority for them. And if they see the groundswell of support for something like this that people have been clamoring for now a month or so, I would be shocked if they don't look into at least finding some way to bring Adam back, even if it's not the same exact project they were working on before.
Yeah, I'll go in the same order. I've seen Kenobi, I think, 4 times. I always kind of go back to scenes and stuff because, like Liam said, there's a lot of high highs for this show, and it's still the one that it's very clearly the most affected by COVID. It's still the one that you can tell that the cinematographer, as well renowned as they are, just like was a great example of someone who just wasn't ready for that technology, wasn't ready to use it. And with the COVID restrictions, whatever learning curve there was must have been exponential. Like you see scenes like when we're on Jabim and the stormtroopers are coming through, they do a decent job getting them into the caves. Once they're in the caves itself, it's like, okay, they're like shuffling along and all that. And then you see dramatically the difference for what we see in Ahsoka, which you can tell still has some of those issues, but is going for more of like a very classical George Romero zombie feel. There's like an intentionality there. There's no intention for these very alive stormtroopers to be walking in the same way and all that, right? So it was frustrating. The chase with Leia is still really bad. I mean, there are just things that I was like, don't love it. Don't like seeing this. I wish the effects were better. I wish we had a little less grain to cover up stuff. But then you see everything of Vader. And again, just like canon has always treated Vader right, and it's still after Master Evil continues to be a knockout for me when it comes to actually handling the character of Vader. Still, even if this is like a story that didn't necessarily need to be made as a whole, Vader is so good in here. I really like it. Like the biggest critique that I can give him is like maybe when he's like holding up Kenobi and with like the force choke, and then he's like kneeling down to try to ignite the fire. I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily have ever thought about Vader like kneeling kind of sideways before. It just doesn't look very robotic. It doesn't look very like I don't know. Just it's just not something I expected to see. It just looked like very much like a cosplayer doing it in that moment, and that's me really nitpicking there. Like I found everything in Vader really great. Still don't love how Reva's back half is integrated, and it was not necessary to like really stab the Grab Inquisitor when and be like, oh, they have two stomachs, right? It's like okay, like I guess, but yeah, I don't know, especially with how big of a character he is in Rebel Season 1, it's not like you're surprising or shocking anyone, you're just kinda confusing them. If they had gone with, like, the whole route of, like, there are multiple clones or something, like a whole, like, Dorsk 81, 82 sort of situation where there's just naturally occurring like genetic clones that are spawned of this specific Pound family or something the Grand Inquisitor comes from. That would have been very interesting to be like, oh, so there are like differences and all that. But instead, we got the same Grand Inquisitor and with not very good makeup, unfortunately, right? Like we've seen a very established look for the Pounds, and I know people have the same kind of criticisms for like how Rosario Dawson looks like as Ahsoka versus what we see, in the prequels with that race. But it's not the same. I think the Pounds, I think you could have just toned it down a little bit and you still would have gotten something a little bit more fitting. Slimmed his head up with CGI or something. But yeah, I don't know. Like anytime you hear Ewan kind of talk about this, it does almost feel like he thought this would be the show on Disney Plus. Like this is what really captures people's attentions. And then Mandalorian kind of just stole all the thunder and did everything right. And especially those first two seasons, just lightning in a bottle. So everything kind of lined up wrong for this to be that show. And then once Andor came out, he's like, oh, okay, so if I can't have effects, maybe I'll have writing. And he doesn't have writing because there are flaws for sure. And this being a film script of a planned trilogy kind of turned into one season of a show that he's begging for like a season two and all that. It's a lot of things that just didn't line up properly for this. But I do really love everything with young Leia. I think that actress is pretty fantastic in it. Like I said, Vader's great. I like what Ewan's got. I just wish that he didn't look so good. Like if he's been living on Tatooine this long, his hair products got to be non-existent. He doesn't really seem like he's really aged that much. So the next 10 years, I guess if he's just meditating in a cave, he really starts to not look after himself or something. But yeah, just like things of those nature. I just love the characters. I thought that stuff was really good. I actually found the fighting to be pretty strong. Like there is a lot of shaky cam, but it's not as horrifying in some of the final battle. Like that very first one between Obi-Wan and Vader, like it's not great, but like it's more about Vader hunting down Kenobi and like saying like this is what you made me. But then that Reva fight, really good there. The flashback fight, you do a little bit more de-aging. I think it's perfect and ties in with everything that's happening on Jabim. That final fight until we got to, I mean, what have we had since that's better in live action? I don't think we've had. I don't,
Acolyte stuff, maybe. But
Yeah, Acolyte. Yeah, Acolyte is definitely better, but that's very prequel inspired. So it's almost like two different branches of fighting. Like this was like a nice blend of taking that prequel fanciness and then putting a little bit more of the weight and heft of the original trilogy and adding in force powers and stuff like we saw a little bit more prevalent in the sequels. I thought it was a nice little blend of everything that again, a year earlier, a year later, I think would have looked way better. And it was already really good. So good show. I don't know if I'd say 7.5. It's somewhere between like a 6.5 and like a light 7 for me. But I think I do appreciate that it's only 6 episodes instead of like 8 and like kind of dragging out or having like such a great high like we see in Ahsoka around episode 4 to 6 and then kind of like tapers off a little bit. Like it builds up after everything with the Inquisitorius stuff on Fortress Inquisitorius. It is a nice little climb up. So I do like that. If that was done a little bit better, I think the show would have been good. That one is just we just got the game too a couple years before. It was still fresh, it's still new, and it just was the one that looked the shoddiest to me. So not the biggest fan of that, but overall 6.5 to 7. And then for what you're saying about Ben, yeah, I like the naming convention of it. I do think like the reasoning is a lot more sound than like Legends Leia having a son named Anakin before Tatooine Ghost had come out. That never really hit me quite right. So that was a strange retcon that worked out later on in Legends, but as it was originally intended, not my favorite thing there. But I like what we saw here. I like that this is someone that she's like, "Are you my father?" And he's like, "I really wish I could be, but I'm not." Like there is that nice little family connectiveness, even if they're in no true way can truly be a family. So I do like that. I do agree that there were hints in other shows, right? I don't know if the blue butterfly thing is specifically. I know that's been a really big thing for the whole hunt for Ben Solo. I think that's just a blue butterfly. I don't think Mandalorian necessarily is predicting or like introducing a young Ben at any point. And maybe if Mandalorian Grogu does it, I'll be proven wrong. I'll take it back. But I don't think that was what that moment was for. But I do agree that this was around the same time as the hunt for Ben Solo was being, scripted, worked on, and all. So there were hints being dropped, and it's a shame that right now it doesn't seem like something's happening. But who knows? Maybe the fervor that we've seen around it being as strong as it was, if not stronger than Battlefront 3, the push for that earlier this year. Uh, I hope that we do hear something pretty soon for Hunt Ben Solo. And if it's not that, at least something where Adam is a big character and you get to take most of the story ideas.
Next up is Batasai again for a second question. Second question is Qui-Gon has always been seen in or as the prototype of a Jedi that the Order and prequel trilogy was always meant to be. But why was he so cold when he says, "I'm not here to free slaves," if he is the most compassionate one or the one associated with "I will do what is correct" kind of Jedi? Honestly, it sounds like something that Obi-Wan and the Phantom Menace would say. It's a good question. I think in that specific context of the dialogue, the way Shmi is talking to him, the way Anakin is looking up to him, I think he's trying to clarify more so than anything that he's not sent here on some type of crusade to free them. He's not That's not the reason they're there. The reason they're there is because they crashed and they have no ability to leave Tatooine. They can't jump into hyperspace. So I think he's more so just clarifying the fact that he isn't on some type of crusade to save Anakin and save everybody. But I don't know. I don't know why else he would say that. I mean, I think there's a difference between Qui-Gon's morality being compromised in that type of scene versus the idea of him being, on his specific mission, kind of hell bent to be the one who gets Padme to Coruscant. That's what he's there to do. That was what he was supposed to do. So I think it's kind of an urgency thing as well. Um, but yeah, good question. I agree. I think Obi-Wan would be the one that would say that, would be the one that would be trying to get him back on track. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on that specific line.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Jedi are like monolithic. They don't just all go in one way, just like how humans in the real world can have almost very contradictory beliefs. In the same way, like this is someone who, despite being a maverick, despite being someone that can, spar with Mace Windu, but then dive into prophecies with his master and Count Dooku, and then kind of still listen to the cosmic and living force and kind of do his own thing and butt heads with his a lot more rigid Padawan and Obi-Wan at this time. He still is raised in that same structure. He still is a human Jedi, born and brought up for the majority of his life on Coruscant. So there are some things that, yes, what we can see as viewers as like dogma, but there are things that like he might also just kind of subtly believe in a lot of ways. Like that's not my responsibility, that's not my role. And I know that seems a little contradictory because Jedi are always like saving people, ending disputes and all that. But in his mind, right, like Liam said, he's there specifically for protecting Padme, protecting the state of affairs on Naboo, and getting her to the capital world to make her plea, make a big case for herself. That is his priority. Deviating any further from it, right, might just attract the wrong attention. I know, like Legends kind of has retconned that Quinlan is like that guy on Tatooine, so there's also other Jedi, and you could then people bring up the question like, well, if there's other Jedi like Quinlan, why didn't like he get alerted and stuff like that? Sometimes they still have to follow the rules. That a rule breaking that Qui-Gon did, 10 years before Attack of the Clones and all that. He wasn't just like, oh, he's different. It was like, oh my God, we don't like him, even though he's so talented, so powerful. That and like, yeah, he is in Master Apprentice, that novel, like offered a seat on the council, and he's fighting with himself about it. Like it go against everything about him, but he is still raised in that system. And it still is a big privilege, big honor, right? It's like these very contradictory elements that kind of have to come and weigh there. The duties and responsibilities that still drive them, the obligations to a Senate more than just the order itself at times. I think that's all of that. But also, it's like that scene when he says it with Shmi, he's seeing Anakin kind of build up the pod racer with his friends, seeing this kid with joy, but such untapped potential. And he has a very interesting relationship with Shmi because once he kind of appears in her life, once Anakin kind of almost forces himself into the picture here, they both know it's a ticking clock. Like, this is his best opportunity to get away. This is his best opportunity to become something more. For her to come along would have been something maybe like a High Republic Jedi could have figured out. But at this point in time, even as maverick as Qui-Gon is, he's probably not too insane to be like, "Okay, I'm gonna just throw everything to the wind and, go and convince Watto to get the Hutts to remove everything, like, and draw more attention. Like, why specifically this family and all that? A kid is a kid, right? A parent, like someone, a working woman who's been on this planet for so long, that's like, well, you're like, well, why is she? What's he so valuable for? Like, what you got? Like, I can understand the kid; he's got potential, but why do you need the whole family unit? Like, that would raise more questions. There's a lot of different things I think just would happen that on Tatooine itself that would also attract attention by bringing both of them, right? A kid can just be like, oh, whatever, just some kid working in a junk shop. But the slave was originally Shmi. That's how it's described in Legends for sure. I'm not sure how it is in canon. So it's a tough thing. It's really tough thing to say why he's so like blunt about it. But I think they both know it's a ticking clock, different obligations, some subconscious level of like he still has to be a Jedi doing what the Jedi is expected of him and what the Senate expects of him. And he just has to say what it with pure honesty. Sometimes, there's a difference between being nice and being kind. And I think if he was like still alive, that would have been the very next thing. But the Jedi just almost felt like no obligation to go back for Shmi. Right? They're like, whoa, this kid's already got so much on his plate, and now that he's lost another like father figure, and you're like, we should keep it separated. Which again, that's not something a High Republic Jedi or like the ideal of a Jedi would have done. But the prequel Jedi, unfortunately, are not. So that's how I would look at it. There's no clear answer. I think the clearest answer you're going to get is George Lucas writes dialogue and expects people to say it, even if there isn't a lot of feeling or reasoning always behind it. And Liam Neeson just delivered it as best as he could and what made sense between what he found and what the actors for Shmi found in their relationship in the future of Anakin.
Well, make sure you're hitting that like button if you're watching right now. We have a lot more people watching than have liked the stream, so make sure you do so. Also, make sure you're sending in your chats. This is an open Q&A. Anybody can send in chats, so make sure you're sending them in, and then we will get to them as fast as we can. Permafrost TX says, if you could transform into any 3 animals, what would you pick? I'd pick an albatross so I could fly anywhere I wanted with ease, a penguin so I could move to Antarctica and live a stress free life just vibing with the boys, and a bear so I could live in the mountains and stay away from everyone else. Those are good options. Let's see. I would pick some type of bird as well. Maybe like an eagle so that you could also fly. That would be, I mean, I think that's a top tier power in general if you're talking about superpowers, right? So I'd want to be able to fly, and I wouldn't want as many predators. So, like, or I wouldn't want to be prey. So I would want to be one of the top dog birds. So I think an eagle. Uh, that's a top one. For me, what else? I've always liked narwhals, so I think a narwhal for the ocean because I think you got to do one land, one air, one water animal. So I think that's where I would be because then you could have every capability, right? So narwhal, an eagle, and a bear is a good one. I'm gonna say a lion just because they're cool and nobody's gonna touch a lion when you're in the savannah. So I'll be a lion as well.
Very interesting question. Uh, I guess for land animal, for me, I'd like to be a cheetah. I love cheetahs. I just want to be able to like sprint like crazy. Um, I also find it very adorable that they're always so like scared and shy when they're like in captivity. So they always have to have like a little dog friend to be like their best friend for like ever, right? And then you'll see like a random golden retriever and like a cheetah. You're like, what's going on here? How did this happen? But it's like it's a very common thing. They have like so much anxiety, especially when they're like not raised, but like with their mother or like in the wild. So I like that. It gives me the potential of having a dog as a friend, which I have to assume there's some extra level more than there is between humans and dogs. So, and that's already a special connection in of itself. Uh, for bird, I'd go for owl. I think it's very interesting to see like more of a big creature and see what goes on about. Like, it's kind of like how like we want to explore so much about space, but there's so much about like the ocean we don't know. Right? In the same way, it's like a lot of things that we know about our world kind of come from daytime. A lot of stuff that is like still unexplored really is in daytime. So I'd love to have that perspective to you know I mean, the way that they eat their food and digest it and just like chuck it out is like a very clean system compared to a lot of birds. So why not that as well? And I was a big fan of Guardians of Gahul reading that as a kid in early high school. That was a very fun series. I know Zack Snyder of all people did like a CGI film, which I have not watched, and from what I've heard, is not that great, even if it is beautiful looking and butchers a lot of the story. So I will not engage in that, unfortunately. But oh man, what would be my third? I guess like a turtle, like the turtle that you see in Finding Nemo, just catching a wave, riding on all the big like rip currents and everything, just having a good time, living a long life. Why not? That seems like a pretty fun time. But if I couldn't do turtle, then I'd probably go penguin as well because they're so fun. And I always see on like TikTok and stuff like what was that movie Surfs Up with like
Yeah.
Cody and his friend the chicken. Like I'm like that's such if I could be a penguin with that dynamic, that's life. That's as good as it gets. So that would be my alternative to a tortoise, just because I think a tortoise probably would have a bit longer of a life, a little bit more fun in warmer waters than out in Antarctica.
Well, thanks for the question, Permafrost. We appreciate your fun questions that you bring every week. Keep sending another one in. You might get on again tonight. Grace Skaggs says, "Hello. What is your all-time favorite book? One that you could pick up right now and reread." It's another great question. Um, so for me, I mean, my background, I've never been a huge novel reader outside of Star Wars. That's always been my thing. So a lot of the things I have read, I read either for school or in the fantasy sci-fi genre, which is the only other genre besides like I feel like Star Wars is its own thing. Like I just kind of treat it as its own genre, but the sci-fi fantasy genre or genres are the only other ones that I often read books in outside of Star Wars, except for comics. I read a lot of comics. So my Star Wars pick is Darth Plagueis. It's my favorite Star Wars book, one of my favorite books ever. So I think that would be easily one I could pick up and reread all the time. My favorite, it's a pretty classic pick, but I've loved reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I fell in love with it in high school when they had me read it, The Hobbit, and I really enjoyed reading everything. So that's another one that's up there for me. And then I love the movies and go back to that world all the time. So that would be up there. The Witcher is a series that I really like. I got into it because of the games and then read the books and really fell in love with that world. My favorite was the second book of the short stories. I'm trying to remember what that one is. I think I got to look it up because I got to remember. It's been a while since I've read them. But that one, and then I also really like the second book of the main novels, which is technically the fourth book. Trying to remember what that one is called too. It's been a while, but the like one that I've also read for school that has stuck with me forever, and I've wanted to reread it a few times in the past few years, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Is Slaughterhouse-Five. That's one of my favorite books, and I feel like if you ask me my favorite novel that wasn't in the fantasy sci-fi genre, even though that is kind of a sci-fi book in a way, I would say Slaughterhouse-Five. So those would be my picks: Slaughterhouse-Five, Plagueis, and then Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I would throw that in there as kind of the fourth Lord of the Rings book.
Yeah, like Liam said, a lot of my reading back in the day was because of school, but I was also like a franchise reader, like Harry Potter, Guardians of
Yeah.
Gahul, um, a little bit of Percy Jackson, at least the original series, stuff like that. I even read like Young James Bond and stuff like that for a bit. There's some horror ones that came out in like middle school that I was reading. I just used to like continuity, and it's because I grew up like a Star Wars fan, right? Like I expected stuff to not just be one and done stories, but like keep going, right? That was kind of always my thing. So yeah, it's there's some. I guess if we're talking about like a specific Star Wars book that I could just read right now, it still would be I Jedi. I think it's just the cleanest way to appreciate the story of the Jedi Knight Academy without a lot of like the weirdness that sometimes comes with it. Um, I definitely like that book quite a bit. I like Corn as a character a lot. I guess I want to say Speaker for the Dead, but I don't think it's a very easy book to pick up as like the second one in like the Ender's Game trilogy. So I would go with Ender's Game. I think that's just like a really strong like first intended standalone book. Uh, Not the biggest fan of Orson Scott Card as a person, but I think those first two books, just fantastic sci-fi, fantastic examination of like human behavior, what it would look like in the near future, and all that. So cool things there for sure. 1984, I think it's always timely. It shouldn't be, but it unfortunately is. And I have a copy of that I've just kept around for the longest time. Uh, I don't know. I don't know. There's a couple other books. Uh, I mean, there's other series I used to read, like Warriors. That was like so many books of that. Redwall series. Yeah, that was a lot of classics in that sense. But I'm trying to. There was a book that I desperately. I would almost want to say the first Dune, because that is intended to just be like a one and done. And I've read Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. I still haven't read God Emperor or anything. But I don't know if I like loved it immediately. It took me a little bit to really get into. I think it was more the second half that, just like the second movie, I think is where a lot of the richness is. Even though the first has probably the better plot, and a lot of that's cut in the first movie. Yeah, I would say Ender's Game. Then that's probably my choice. I really have been planning on doing a reread of like Anna Karenina and like a little bit more of the classics, like Tolstoy and all that. Catching the Rye is definitely something I want to check up again too. Like just books that you know you were told to read, or like your teachers kind of made you read. But I know like it's important to read that stuff, but I still think a lot of those books we weren't ready for. Like even if it was nice to read it, you don't get it until I would say until you're in your late teens, early 20s. Like I remember my teacher in 5th grade read us Animal Farm. What am I gonna like truly understand? It's cool, like it's an interesting story, and she was explaining it. But now I'm like, wow, that's like so heavy. It's so topical. There are things that I would really, really appreciate now. But at that time, like, no, not really. So a lot of great books that now that I don't have like the pressure of like I have to read this in like 1 week or something and have a quiz every week. I'd love to read again. That's where like my original love of reading was from. Not once they started like standardizing and forcing it. I know it's just to get kids to be almost forced to read, but it never really worked out that day. When we were in high school, we had like Spark Notes and stuff like that. Now kids have Chat GPT. Like they're skipping it all along once you're kind of forcing them to read this many books and stuff like that. So it's a shame, but I guess this turned into a little bit of a mini rant about how schools take a lot of great classics and kind of push them a little too early because it has to be part of a curriculum.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's how you kind of know the ones that you read back then and still have kind of stuck with you must be amongst your favorites, because most of the time we're forcing them, especially when you get older, like AP literature class, and you have to read like 15 books that year. Like it's just nonstop, and you don't get a break from things you want to read, so all those types of things. Yeah, I think I definitely read more things I wanted to when I was in grade school outside of Star Wars because you had more time and then also like AR tests and you had to like read something in order to take the test on it. Percy Jackson was my thing back then for reading. Um, but yeah, I looked up the Witcher books because it was killing me that I couldn't remember the first one, and I knew the title, but I thought it was I got it mixed up with the first one. I was thinking Sword of Destiny was the first one, but it is the second one. So Sword of Destiny is easily my favorite Witcher book. So if you're looking to get into The Witcher, I love that one. And then Time of Contempt is my favorite of the novels. So those are that for The Witcher. Definitely recommend checking out that series though. And then follow ups to that. Permafrost says, I just read the first trilogy of Red Rising and really enjoyed it. It's like a combo of Ender's Game and Hunger Games. Yeah, my girlfriend was reading that series. I heard she said it was really good. I got to check it out at some point. I got they had a free audiobook for it on Audible for a little while. I don't know if it's still there, but it was one of those like free included ones in your subscription. And I've always heard good things. So I got to check it out one day. I did read the first Hunger Games also, but then I fell behind the movies and I just stopped reading them. And then Grace says, need to read The Hobbit. Love the movies. Also need to read Darth Plagueis. I have heard so many good things about them. Yeah, it's a great book. It's my favorite Star Wars book. It's got a lot of lore. It's got a lot of really deep story. It's right at the end of Legends. It was a year after Disney bought it. So you have everything tied together. It's like kind of one final push to unite, especially Old Republic with the prequels, and then also just kind of tie together everything about the Sith that we've learned over the kind of disassociated stories of the 30 years of Star Wars storytelling leading up to that. So it's a great book. If you're interested in the Sith or the prequels at all, it's my number one recommendation. It's so good. I love it so much. I've read it a few times now, and I always get the desire to go back to it. So definitely got to check that out. And I love The Hobbit too. Like, most people associate The Hobbit with Lord of the Rings, but The Hobbit is just kind of a fun read to like, Lord of the Rings are dense. There's a lot of world building and it's a lot of great stuff. And you read The Lord of the Rings, especially because there's so many fun things that are in it that's not in the movies. So it's like if you want to learn more about the world itself rather than the specific plot, it's kind of the reason to go back and read it, is even if you're somebody who's seen the movies a bunch of times. But with The Hobbit, everything that's in The Hobbit is in the movie because there's three movies for one book, and and then some. But The Hobbit is short. I think it's 300-ish pages, maybe less, depending on what version you're reading. And it's just a fast-paced, straight to the point kind of story, and it's got all the Tolkienisms, the singing, the fun, the whimsy. It's got all that. And so I go back to The Hobbit more, honestly, than I even do The Lord of the Rings sometimes. I mean, I prefer The Lord of the Rings story, but they're hard to get back into over and over and over again. The Hobbit is a more fun, easy read. So definitely check that out if you haven't. And then Permafrost says, love Animal Farm too. Yeah, Animal Farm's another good one. Absolutely hated The Alchemist, though. That's a rare opinion. I haven't read The Alchemist. That was one I actually had to buy for school, and then we never ended up reading it. But so I have it. I just still haven't read it. So one day maybe I'll get to it. But sad to hear you hated it. I've always heard good things. And then Grace says, I Jedi is on my list to read too. Just started reading Star Wars books in June. I have read 22 so far, so I'm hooked. LOL. Always looking for recommendations. Thank you all for answering my question. Of course, Grace. Glad you're enjoying your journey into Star Wars books. And we've got a lot of videos on the channel, as I'm sure you probably know, and my other channel, Legends Lore, which you can find linked to this channel as well, where you have tons of recommendation videos and top tens and all sorts of things. So make sure you check those out if you're looking for other recs as well. All
Yeah,
right.
very interesting choices there.
Scrolling back up, we have, let's see, Permafrost, who says, oh, wait, that's in response to the Qui-Gon thing. So we'll go past that. Then Badasai says, The Prestige is a movie that, in my opinion, depicts one of the great Sith dynamics. So much I would love a direct adaptation of that dynamic into Star Wars, what other movies for you achieve that level of Star Wars genetics? That's a really good question. Something I haven't thought about. Um, well, I mean, if you look at especially a lot of things that inspired Lucas, like Kurosawa movies, there's a lot there. Whether it be Seven Samurai, whether it be A Throne of Blood, whether it be Hidden Fortress, there are a lot of things in those movies that have a lot of Star Wars isms because they directly inspired George Lucas. But as for things like The Prestige, which you might consider inspired by Star Wars, that's a really interesting idea. I'd have to think about it more so than the quick answer off the top of my head. Like I'd have to scroll through my letterbox and see, oh yeah, that one. But something that's kind of like in that vein that you're talking about. Um, I think you can find that dynamic of like two people pushing each other past the point of no return multiple times over. One thing that I think about immediately like that is Heat. I think that's a movie that you can kind of compare that type of dynamic to. I mean, they're villain and hero, right? So it's a little bit different, but they both are kind of pushing themselves beyond their limits, closer and closer to the edge, which is I think comparable more so to Prestige, although both characters in Prestige do very questionable things. So they're both kind of anti-heroes at times, but I would say that Hugh Jackman is lined up to be a little bit more of the hero character throughout the film. But yeah, good question. I'm gonna have to pull up my letterbox while Sonic answers because I feel like there's a dozen other movies I could bring up, but can't think of anything off the top of my head.
This was a good question, but a tough question. Wow, I don't know. I don't know. It's
There are a
tough.
lot
Yeah. I'm just
because you
looking at
kind
what
of
I have in my letterbox too, and it's tough.
well, I mean, you kind of hear like that's the thing with Star Wars, right? Is every movie that's come out since 77, or not maybe not every movie, but at least every filmmaker since 77 has been inspired by Star Wars in some way. And especially in the last 25, 30 years, you have a lot of people who have grown up with Star Wars. And so I think there's a little bit of Star Wars isms in pretty much anything that you see with especially a fantasy vibe, a sci-fi vibe, or anything that has to do with like the good versus evil dynamics, which
Yeah.
Star Wars has kind of become our modern myth in that sense. So it's hard to pinpoint just one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't I guess I'd go in a slightly different way of answering this. I'd love to almost see something like a Cowboy Bebop in Star Wars just to see like what it is like to kind of deal with the state of the galaxy and be down on your luck. Because everybody we follow in Star Wars is either part of like a big, military unit, or it has incredible power, right? Or has like found some little gap in between where they're rich or something like that. It's nothing quite like where people are just kind of stuck and down on their luck and like just fitting in the little gaps and stuff, right? So I'd almost like to see something like that be done in this like new post sequel era, just like of people like filtering through all the different small governments that take over. I don't think we're gonna have a centralized government in the galaxy anytime soon, or hopefully not anytime soon. I think that would be where the most story potential lies. So I kind of love to see like how different parts of the galaxy have been shaped. Right, we're not gonna necessarily get big animation or movie storytelling during the sequel era or just before the sequel era. So the next best thing is to see what it's like after the sequel era and see what's been devastated because of the events, what's been already bad, or what's already kind of avoided all that stuff. I'd love to see something like that. I don't want to see Evangelion. I don't think Star Wars needs something like that unless they do. What is it? The Bedlam spirits and Celestials and everything kind of just goes crazy. Maybe if they do something like that, it just I don't see a movie being made out of that dynamic, especially. But I can definitely see some very thought provoking developments in the Force and all that affect someone whose mind can't comprehend it. I'd love to see something like that. Uh, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see like a Dr. Afra like special presentation or something, just in the vein of Indiana Jones, but like a little darker, a little bit more like in for herself. That's already how she's written. I just kind of want her like she is the biggest original character that we have in the comics. I'd love to see her that sort of story be told in a slightly bigger medium. I don't know. I think like a There Will Be Blood in Star Wars would be really interesting to see. Just someone who just is trying to destroy a world in some sense, and then seeing like someone who's theoretically good, right? In comparison, just like what it can do to break down another monster's psyche of some sorts. That was always very character driven, very performance driven film. But I do love the Paul Dano dynamic that he has there. But I don't know what else. You already said Heat, which I mean that's one I
Yeah.
would have immediately gone to.
I think when you said Cowboy Bebop, my mind immediately went to Firefly and Serenity as well.
That's a good one.
Um,
Yeah.
that's another one that's obviously very inspired by Star Wars, just visually. Um, but yeah, that's another one that's very comparable, I think, to Cowboy Bebop.
I
There are so
I'd
many.
I'd love to see like an Inception. I'd love to see like a Star Wars Inception where like there's something about not world between worlds. I don't think we have to keep on going back to that specifically, but just see some very interesting ways where the Force has to be used as a tool, but not necessarily like as a martial amplifier, not necessarily just telekinesis, but just like the different things that you have to like do to like change a person or something like that. That'd be very interesting. Just get a little weirder with the Force. I think the Inception you don't necessarily have to do like a dream or an idea like that, but I think you can do something very cool with like breaking down people's barriers and connection between them. I think that'd be pretty sick. The thing I think would be nice too, like to have something like that kind of play out. Like I don't want it to just be Star Wars is the thing, but just the whole idea of I mean, it's almost like you could watch like the Body Snatchers movie kind of play out here too. It'd be very interesting, I think, as a concept because I don't think Star Wars has very ever much had like a species purely try to take over by like imitation. It's always been a little bit more like we will destroy you and we'll make sure that you know it's us. So I think that'd be very interesting to see.
Yeah, and About a Size says Hunt for Red October, which yeah, again has that kind of dynamic that good versus evil kind of cat and mouse dynamic that something like Heat has for sure. Yeah, there's so many. I got to keep thinking about it because I started in '77 and just kind of been scrolling back through everything I've ever watched. But there are so many movies that definitely have that DNA. So I think that's another great question. Thank you so much for that one. Let's move on to your next one, Batsai, who says, despite reception, Riva has a lot of narrative potential when I think about it, both in her past and future. What would your path for her, thinking about her whole character story, be? Clearly, Vader saw himself in her, found in the gutter, but with a lot of potential. I wouldn't discard a second, more personal confrontation with Vader in the future. I think if she comes against Vader again, she's got to die. I mean, in general, it's just, and I'm not saying that in hate towards the character. It's just I don't like when people live against Vader, especially earlier in the Dark Times. Just like that mystique needs to be there, and so one of the frustrating things that I do agree with a lot of people about is the lightsaber stabbing and the fact that she gets stabbed twice in that series, once as a little kid and then once again as an adult, and lives both times. I think is wild. So if she comes in contact with Vader again, I think she has to die, and it could be a good way for her to go. Paralleling their stories, like you're saying. Obviously, that parallel is there in the story. Maybe it's when she fought Vader the first time, she was gonna give herself in anger. Now she finds herself again, kind of centers herself, finds a cause to fight for. If she goes and helps the path, maybe she gives herself now in love and in the spirit of the Jedi, and she dies fighting Vader off again, but saves everybody instead of trying to kill him and hate. I think that would be a way for her to go. It would be something that would have a little bit more power, and it would again get rid of her as a character now knowing, who Vader's kids are, knowing who Vader is, and all that type of stuff, it would, you'd wrap up that plot. But we both said once that wrapped up that the story for her in the future is somewhere in the dark times, either with like a Quinlan or with a Cal Kestis or with somebody in that specific part of the dark times. I think before we watched it, or before we got Jedi Survivor, when we originally watched Riva, we didn't know when Survivor was going to come out. So now with Survivor taking place so far past Fallen Order, it would be a little bit more. It would be more surprising to see her join Cal at that point. It would mean she would have to have lived pretty much the entire Dark Times, which is a possibility. But I think something for her, I would say maybe like the 8 BBY, 7 BBY period. I think she could die in that period because the Obi-Wan show takes place in 10 or 9 BBY. So it's, I think, a little bit of time for her to go through a transformation, reclaim her identity as a Jedi, and then go back to fighting Vader and maybe perishing at the hands of Vader, but saving people. That seems like a fairly good arc for her. To me, it's a better arc than she would have had in the Obi-Wan show. I think thematically and symbolically in that show, if she had just died at the hands of Vader, I think it still could have worked because the point was these cycles of hate and how you can keep yourself alive with anger and with hate, and your life is dedicated to it. But once you surrender yourself from it, I mean, I think she could have had a moment where she surrenders herself from it and dies in the Vader conflict in Obi-Wan, and you would have still kind of gotten the same thing. So, just in regards to that, on another tangent, I think whatever you do with her has to be something that's worthwhile enough to the point where it's like worth keeping her alive, because clearly whatever reason they kept her alive for, she must have some type of purpose in the grand scheme of things. So I think that would be the way to give her the most purpose, to protecting the path, some type of story there, but a sacrificial one, because obviously got to get rid of the character who knows about Anakin and Vader.
Yeah, that's where it kind of gets tricky and tough, right? Like, in a lot of ways, it made sense for her to have been a cautionary tale about like living off of anger alone, and what it actually leads you to. The power that she gains is so temporary when she's actually faced with something bigger. Like, that's a big thing that Andor really nails for me. It's like, yeah, it makes you care so much about Cyril and what Dedra are doing, but at the end of the day, like, they're small fodder to what we see with Krennic and Ursa. And Krennic is also just another small fry to Vader, who himself is like a step down from Palpatine, right? It's like evil has layers. Evil is not just like a straight elevator up. Like, it is a collapsing tower, and it's about the people who survive, who push their way up to the top. So it would have been very interesting to have it handled that way. I still don't mind how the stuff with Luke, if it has to be that way, like what she sees in Luke and therefore reflects in herself, and like, oh my god, like, I have just continued the pattern, that's fine for me. I actually think it's solid. It just, having it intercut with the Obi-Wan and Vader fight, I was like, I don't know if I necessarily needed it to play out this way. Like, I almost would have been very interested to see if, like, as Kenobi's on his way back and he senses this danger, that's when this whole thing plays out, and you see Baru, you see Owen, you see what affects them and shapes them. They say much of the same things, and then she sees Luke, and then she's like, "Let's it go, right? Let's go of the anger, let's go of the hate." And then by the time Kenobi rushes on the scene, that happens. Intercutting it, I think, actually ruins a lot of what good there is in that final storyline for her. But yeah, I remember once they come out, I was like, we know Survivor set basically in the same year. It'd be very interesting for her to be like some little synergy there, kind of connect it all together, and it didn't come to fruition. And now we're in this very interesting place where the centralized hub of the path of some sorts is destroyed, right? With Jeddah and everything there is gone. We've seen that Cal is kind of now the person who should be leading the path, but I just don't see it per se, because he's kind of in the maze right now. He's on that planet where you can only access it if you have the key or if you have the force and already have seen the key, right? Like it's not really the best place. It's a great sanctuary, but it's not really a place to do like centralized planning and recouping like younglings and Jedi knights and children with force potential, right? So it's tough now because I don't know if I would necessarily think like a centralized path works. Now I'd almost see it more if she does continue on this path of redemption. I'd be very interested if she can like save other younglings from the time of Order 66, save other people who fall into the dark side as opposed to people who just need a means of escape who've always been, leading toward the light, right? She should be kind of someone who's there like this is her redemption, this is her path forward, like she is helping, she is healing, but she needs to do it with the people that she's most qualified for, to be frank, right? Like she's the one who would know it most. I don't think she'd be any better than like a what we get with Quinlan, what we get with Asajj. Like we've seen them handle both the darkness and good, but where they leave off at the end of their stories in the Clone Wars and all that, they're good people who have had years of Jedi training. She's still somebody whose majority of her training has been, unfortunately for her, as a dark side adept, as a inquisitor, right? So I'd love to see her story be more about healing that issue that she, directly continued adding to and contributing to. I'd love to see if she could do something on Fortress Inquisitorius where she kind of destroys all like or like freeze the corpses of the Jedi that are like frozen in golden amber or whatever it is when it was first introduced in Rebels. Like that's something that it's like wow, like I played through Fallen Order and I'm like there's no way Cal can go back for that, but I'd wonder if Reva can do something or has some sort of connections inside to destroy that level and free those, Jedi from that stasis of that, gruesome capture. So I'd love to see the elements of the show kind of played out there that she is most directly connected to. Past that, oh, I don't. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't see her fighting Vader head on anymore. If she does, I'd almost want her to be like a sacrifice. Like she's like, I'm not even gonna try to fight you. Like I'm just. And Vader should see like, oh my God, you're hiding something more. You're trying to protect somebody else. There's no reason you just give yourself up this easily and just be a nuisance, right? Instead of actually like fighting me head on like last time. It can't be simply because what you've let go and learn, and it's because she's doing something like that, which falls more in the traditional Jedi way, but I think that's when she would be truly a Jedi again, when she's actually done something that a Jedi would do. Everything else is just undoing her mistakes. So that's how I would look at it.
I was trying to think of some other movies for you. I pulled up a few others. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I think, has a lot of Star Wars inspirations, and then of course Guardians of the Galaxy as well. Okay, next question.
I got one movie I need to add there. I would say I'd love to see something during the Clone Wars with HoloNet News in the same method of what is it called, network, just to see like these guys go
Wow.
crazy, be like everything we're hearing, the propaganda we're spewing, Palpatine's influence, right? I'd love to see like how like again, this would be like way too grounded of a Star Wars film, but I'd love to see something like that about how we could see like the early proto imperial way of like disseminating information and how it changes from the Republic days. You can see a little bit more about like the hero with no fear and how like the negotiator and Kenobi and all these characters that we follow in the Clone Wars, how like they're received by the general public, and then we could see these people who are like progressively forced more and more and see like people around them change who used to be truly about the news and reporting and play the game a little bit, but now they're like truly just you know they have to say the craziest things and they're going crazy and then they're finding that people like are loving that. I'd love to see like oh my God, like how that would change one person, how that would destroy them after having such a more normal career until the war starts.
Yeah, Permafrost says I always thought the Drengir would translate into an old monster movie type pretty easily and
Yeah,
would be a nice intro into the High Republic material. Yeah, there's a lot of cool things you could do there with the monster kind of dynamic. I think especially, a Godzilla-esque, host-esque, something like
yeah,
that. you could do pretty cool with the Drengir as well. That's another good question or a good pick as well. Batasai says Devil Advocate. The Devil's Advocate as a Sith origin story. Pacino reveals himself as a Sith Lord. Keanu succumbs and starts his training. Yeah, another good one that has that Sith dynamic. I think the Sith dynamic is the one, or Master and Apprentice dynamic as well for the Jedi. It's one you can find in a lot of different movies. Whether it's attributed to Star Wars or not, but it's probably the most comparable to a lot of other films throughout. And then kind of the Western vibe that Star Wars kind of pulled from with that team up, that fun, Saturday matinee Western combo you see in a lot of movies nowadays as well. Everybody's trying to find that specific vibe. so so those are more good ones. What's your favorite Star Wars ship design? Oh boy, there's a lot of good ones. I mean, it's hard to beat the X-wing. That's the one growing up, played with the toys the most. I would say overall favorite might have to be the Fire Spray gunship. I love Boba Fett's ship. I love Slave One. It's such a cool ship. And then also the LAAT, I think is really, really cool. So those two have always been some of my favorites.
I don't know. This is the tougher question for me because it kind of Star Wars has like very distinct eras when it comes to ships. Like angularity is such a huge thing, and what we see in the original trilogy. But then when you look at everything that we see in the prequels, it's about like beautification, how things were in the peace times before it has to become more militarized, and then the sequels are about like old things come back again and become even more stereotypical, stereotyped, right? At least what we got so far design wise. So I would say Ada 2. I think that's a big one that I really like. I know people were big fans of like Delta 7. That one always felt a little simple. I like the Delta 7 that Anakin has in Clone Wars. That one just being like modded out, like that one. I'm like, yeah, that's sick. The standard one, I'm like, it's fine, but it's like it always comes off as like a paper airplane to me. Like, unfortunately, it is. It's very angular. It's very simple. It makes sense for the Jedi, right? You want to have, the idea of danger about cutting through something very clearly without necessarily being something so weaponized looking, right? So I like the design behind it. I think the Ada class too, just it's a nice little blend. I know people back in '05 were like, this is like the first bridge to TIE fighters, but I was like, no, I guess I can see with the cockpit, but I just think it was just it found its like nice, perfect place of like being with like the most perfectly militarized Jedi who are still kind of doing what's right. I found it a very interesting design. I'm a big fan of the B Wing. I think the B Wing didn't get a lot of love, obviously, with the blue screen of
Mhm.
Return of the Jedi, kind of screwed it over, unfortunately. So you can really get a lot of shots of it, but we've seen it with Rebels, we've seen it with Squadrons, like just the immense power that thing can have, and it's just a ship. I think at least in animation and modern filmmaking, like I'd love to see in like Starfighter, just like a bunch of different citizen fleets and stuff like that. I'd love to just see the whole alphabet squadron essentially assembled here with A wing, X wing, B wing all being used. We've read about it. Let's actually see it now. I'd love to see something like that. There was something from this. Oh, U-wings and U-wings are pretty good shots. Yeah, I will say the U-wing is one of like the most underrated designs of Rogue One. It's just become like so standardized now that like you expect to see it in any original trilogy material now, and it just works so well. Oh, I like the what are they called in the High Republic? The vectors that the Jedi use that are like lightsaber
Mhm.
activated. I really like those designs. I think it kind of goes back to Legends and Tales of the Jedi time when there were like starships that were just not very good, but had to be literally be piloted using the Force. It's like kind of like that, but like it can only be operated by a Jedi with their lightsaber and with like them connecting with the Force. I find that very interesting. I'd love to see that played out. What's that design that like a lot of the clone pilots and clone bombers use? It's like a trifold wing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember
yeah.
the name.
What is that? It's gonna kill me. Uh, clone
You're
bombers.
talking about like early Clone Wars?
Early Clone Wars, yeah.
Yeah, like in the movie. Is it a version of the V-wing?
The torrent.
Like,
Yes, it's the torrent. That's what it was. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the V-19 torrent starfighter. That's a classic design where it still has like that beauty of the era, but you can see the militarization, the angularity start kicking in. It just looked so cool. So much of early Clone Wars designs, like it seems like a lot of people during the war were like, how long is this war really going to take? It's going to be like a 6 month conflict. So let me just give you some stuff that's just been upgraded, been fine tuned for wartime. That wasn't the original purpose.
yeah, that's another great one. I really like that one as well. Had the toy of that one. Honestly, all my favorites are the ones that I had the toy of. That's why the LAAT is one of my favorites of all time, just because it's like I played with that one over and over again, and especially the one from the ARC Troopers that has this like shark mouth on it. Love that one, and also Anakin's Anakin's starfighter in the Clone Wars '03. I believe it's called the Azure Angel. That one, I love that one. The engines in the front, so cool. It's a shame that it was destroyed by Ventress. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again for one of these Q&As. Hopefully you guys had a nice time. We had a great time talking with you guys and taking all of your questions. Had some familiar faces, some new people, a lot of fun taking your guys' questions. So make sure you join us again next week for our Tuesday live stream and Q&As. Really appreciate all of the feedback you guys have been giving us about the new format, and also the questions, continuing to show up with your questions and your thoughts over and over again. We appreciate that and love having these discussions. So make sure you keep bringing them next week. And the ones we didn't get to right at the end, make sure you bring them back for next week's stream. Make sure you like the stream if you haven't. More people watching right now than have liked. And if you're watching on replay, join us every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. We go live and we take your guys' questions. The news show, for those of you who didn't hear last week, we're not doing a news show anymore unless there's genuinely good, concrete news to talk about. So we'll be covering those in live streams when that happens. And we're going to try to do it on the day of announcement for the latest Star Wars news. So keep an eye out for that. We have more content coming out this week. We're finally going to film our trailer reaction, or not trailer reaction, trailer tier list that our Patreon members have voted on. So we're going to get to that one. So you guys will see that up within the next week or so. We also see a fan question of the week go up this week as well. So make sure you check those out throughout the week. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we will see you all next time.